But this is like I would say this is like the late 1920s. Hoover's president, and it's the time of Hoover, and then at the end it's going to be going into the presidency of FDR. Does that make sense? So that's what we're kind of talking about. But we're going to also be talking about the overall, aspects of the 1920s that led to the Great Depression. Does that make sense? Okay, so the nation's sick economy, hardship, and some other things. Okay, in this particular slide, we already talked about this stuff. We talked about how the railroads, textile industries, etc., were barely making profits. You can see that in other industries as well. Farmers, we talked about the farmers, but what I didn't talk about was specific things that were put into place to try to help those farmers. Okay? So, they suffered the most. Farmers risked a lot to meet the demand that the war had created, like I was telling you. Crop prices fell 40%. The boost in production only made matters worse. 40% is a large number. Okay? And then the McNally-Hagen bill, legislation designed to help farmers with price supports. Okay, so the government at different times throughout our history has. You guys ever heard of subsidies? You know what a subsidy is?
Grants.
A subsidy is government money given to certain industries to help them stay stable. Does that make okay? Well, we still do that with farmers and some other, because we got to have the farmers, right? So during this time period, this bill came out, and it was the point of it was to help the farmers because they weren't doing so well. And they did this in the 1930s too. Actually, I'll give you another example in a minute. But they bought a surplus of crops at guaranteed prices and selling them on the world market. Okay. So the government was going to buy these over surplus goods at the market value. Market value means what they should be worth. Does that make sense? So they're really worth something down here, but they're buying them up here, and then they're going to try to sell them to the rest of the world so that the government can recoup their money. Does that make sense? What if the world doesn't buy it, though? Okay? And also, but the bill was vetoed. Because what did I tell you about these three presidents, the Republican presidents in the 1920s? They had a laissez-faire way of dealing with the economy and with the people. That the people should deal with the stuff themselves. The government should not give out free handouts. Okay? When we get to the 30s, it's going to change when FDR comes in. Questions? Okay. Again, we talked about consumers having less money for the reasons that we talked about. Living on credit, people are starting to buy on credit and so forth, and they were also doing what with credit?
Getting in debt.
Yes, but what were they buying that was, I told you,
Stocks.
is illegal now? So stocks, buying on? Margin, right, okay. And then also the unequal distribution of wealth. We talked about that as well. Rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. This is going on right now. If you pay attention, you can see it in our structure of our economy right now. You need a strong middle class. That middle class is what they say is shrinking. You've got very few rich and a lot of poor. The rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer. More than 70% of the nation's families were earning less than $2,500 per year. Now, with inflation, we're like, oh, $2,500 a year, that's nothing. Well, back then, you have to assume for inflation. So that might be $20,000 now. I'm just guessing. I know a couple of years ago, the poverty line for a family of four was like $18,000 a year or something like that. That would, make it so you could get, government welfare and stuff like that. But 70% were below that. That meant that 70% of the people were struggling. Okay. Electricity, heat, new clothing, technological advances were just some of the things that people had to live without. Remember the video we watched the other day? They were talking about all the new inventions that people could use. Well, they weren't necessarily using them now because they couldn't afford it. They had to get by just by doing whatever. Later on I'll tell you some stories. Like my grandmother was telling me. I used to have my grandma. She's passed away. but I used to have her come to my class and talk to my classes. And she would talk about the Great Depression. And I always remember the story that she was saying that they couldn't afford to buy new shoes. So they would buy this one pair of shoes. I don't know if they're pailovers. I can't remember exactly. It was a kind that everybody had back then. And when the shoe sole, you know what the sole is? Part that you actually stand on. When the sole got bad, they would basically cut out cardboard, and they would then put cardboard in the shoe, and then that would be their new sole. And they would continue to wear it until it totally would wear out, and then they would try to get a new pair. I mean, it was bad. We'll read some other things later that you guys will go, wow, this is crazy. So, anyway, people had to live without because of the economy. We talked about the election of 1928 with Hoover and Alfred E. Smith. Hoover winning with the majority. And we also talked about the stock market. I mentioned the Dow Jones. Dow Jones, there's several markets. You guys remember the two markets? There's Dow Jones, and then there's the what? The NASDAQ, which is nowadays tech one. They didn't even have it before because there wasn't all this technology. But the Dow Jones is important to Michigan because a lot of there's 30 companies that they look at to see how healthy our economy is. And a lot of those companies are sitting in Michigan. Okay? There's Michigan companies too, but so your Ford, GM, and Chrysler are big industrial corporations that employ a lot of people and make a lot of money. And we can tell how our economy is doing based on how they're doing. Make sense? And that's why you hear the Dow was up, the Dow was down. There's two kinds of economies or situations where you're talking about these indexes. Okay? One's a bull market, one's a bear market. How many people have ever seen the commercial for Merrill Lynch? What is their logo? I know you know this and you've seen it, but just you don't recall. Merrill Lynch.
How does it go?
It's a big, strong bull. Have you seen it? Now, do you remember? It's a big bull. How about Prudential? It's a rock. Why would they have those as their logos? It's very strong. It's very stable. In a bull market, the market's good. You're never going to see a logo as a bear for a financial corporation because bear means bad. Make sense? So the bull market was the one that kept going up and up and up and up, up and up. And although only 3% of the nation's population owns stocks, all that information and all those stocks were connected to everybody else as well. And so even knowing only 3% owned those stocks, it affected everybody. You know, I was telling the other class, I said, you know, if the United States in the 2007-8, basically the government bailed out the banks. And back during this time period, we were connected to the rest of the world, but not like we are now. Right now, we have our fingers in everything and everywhere throughout the world. If the United States economy would have totally blundered and fell in 2007 and 8, what do you think would have happened to the rest of the world markets? They went down, but they didn't collapse. They would have. Yeah.
Doesn't that mean that so much of our economy was put in that 3% of the nation's population? So much of the money we were...
Well, yeah, when we were talking about the wealthy,
Yeah.
the wealthy didn't have their money circulating. Yep, absolutely. And then we already talked about that stuff as well. Okay. The stock market crashed on October 24th, 1929, known as Black Tuesday. Record number of shares was sold, 16.4 million shares in one trading day. That's a lot, okay? A lot of people in huge debt, wiped out their life savings, because I was telling you people were in the stock market that shouldn't have been. And this number really gets me. It's mid-November, 1 month later, approximately $30 billion were gone. 30 billion. Now, back during the same, no, $30 billion is a lot of money. How much was it back then? It'd be like $1 trillion now. You know, I mean, it was a lot. All right. I was telling, okay, you guys, how many of your parents have Costco or Sam's Club memberships? Okay, I'm a Costco guy. Okay. So I'm reading this article the other day. Guess how much Costco makes per year? Per year.
10 billion.
10 billion more.
50 billion.
100 billion.
75 billion.
45.
80 billion.
95.
90 billion.
95.
88. $88 billion a year. That's a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen. If you think of the amount of money that's in circulation today, this looks like a small number, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a huge number for the time period and inflation back then. Okay, questions? Now this is the chart I was telling you guys about. Now here's what I want you to do on this. This is going to be a little challenging, but this is what you have to do on the AP exam. I want you to look at this chart, and I want you to try to figure out the ebbs and flows. Like it says some of it on there, okay? But that'll disappear in a second. So if you look at the peak, the highest one, when was that? You don't even have to look at the dates. When was this? October?
28, 29.
All right, well, it's October of 1929, right? And then look at this. So if this is 1929 and you're 1930, right? And you bring this down, you can see that it dipped big time. I mean, a lot. Remember we said that all the rich guys went in there and tried to like buy the stock. That was a temporary thing for a couple days. You'll notice that it went down. And just like always, as I say, everything goes up and goes down. It's history repeats itself, right? So you see that pattern. It goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down, all the way down to right here. So why? My question is why did it start going up right there? That's the question. So obviously we were at, down to 40. 40. Okay? That's pretty low in 1932. So what happened in 1932 to make it start going back up? Come on, think. We haven't talked about it yet, but you should be able to get it.
World War II?
In 32? What happened significantly in 1932? Who said it? Somebody said it. FDR got elected. And what did FDR do? The New Deal. Started breathing confidence into the economy again, okay? So you'll notice it goes up, it comes back down, but eventually it's going to go back up, and it says here, not until 1954 did it really get back to normal. When did technically, and different sources say different things. I was reading something today that said 1939. I would say the Great Depression went from 1929 to 1941. Why did it end in 41? What? What'd you say? Speak up.
World War II.
That's kind of. You're on the right track. I want specifics.
All right.
Come on.
It's because during World War II we started production again.
We did start production. And what happened in 1941? Guys, what got us in the war? Pearl Harbor. But did we start to mobilize our military before Pearl Harbor? Yes, we did. We were just kind of waiting for a reason to get in. But we were starting to mobilize. War is a good thing for the economy if you're winning. Or if you're not in the war, for that matter. You're selling the stuff to other countries, right? That's what Germany did. We'll talk about that later. We'll talk about him. Okay, so anyway, FDR, New Deal, it's going to start going up from there. All right. What time do you guys get here? 55, all right, we're good. So let me try to get through this real quick. We talked a little bit about this. We talked about the banks closing. I said you have a table, you've got 4 legs, and it's stable. But if you take 2 legs out, it collapses, right? Well, when 11,000 of the 25,000 banks in the country close, what does it say about our economy?
Oh, it's going down.
That's like half. Almost. That's a lot. 90,000 businesses closed, okay? By the way, during economic hardships, a lot of times there's a lot of creativity and a lot of businesses actually come out of those time periods. In fact, some of our most famous businesses have started in recessions or depressions and stuff like that. Unemployment was up 25% in 1933. 1 out of every 4 people was unemployed. In some cities in the United States, up to 60% were unemployed. Could you imagine? Who was working? And 60%, that's a lot, In Michigan, in the, I don't remember exactly what the worst year was in our recession that we're in right now, we got up to, and it might even be more, 17%, which is really high. 4% is normal. You got to have some unemployment. Not everybody works, you know. But it was at least 17%. That's very high. All right. Now, if we're having a depression, now remember, what war just happened? World War I. We had, I shouldn't say we, but the war destroyed Europe. They had to rebuild, right? And if we're having an economic problems and we're actually lending some of that money through the Dawes plan, which we didn't talk about, but the Dawes plan was a way for us to give money to the European nations to rebuild their country, and then they were going to give it back to us in interest. And okay, if we were having economic problems, we couldn't do that anymore. What do you think happened to them?
Their economy was going down too.
Worse. Okay, in Germany, this is what's going to happen in Germany. They're going to be so low that they're going to allow who to come to power? Hitler, which we'll get into in the next chapter. Okay. The Hawley-Smoot Tariff, 1930, was passed. Highest protective tariff ever in the United States history. So we're having world of hurt over here, problems. So we put a protective tariff into place. Now, what's tariffs do?
Taxes.
Well, it taxes people from other countries, so it's supposed to protect our businesses here, right? But what always happens when we put a tariff on?
The other countries put
The other country put tariffs on too. So they might not be buying our American products and stuff like that. And so, you know, it's a catch-22 if you look at it from that point of view. All right, these are the cause of the Great Depression. What is the immediate cause of the Great Depression? All right, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed. But in general, we've got tariffs and war debts, okay, that weren't being paid back. Financial crisis, we talked about that. Availability of credit in the stock market, all that kind of stuff. And then unequal distribution of wealth. In this particular slide, which will be online, I already put it online actually tonight. It's on both websites, Edmodo and my site. This is a simple Venn diagram of the, you know, how is it different for people in different areas, you know? So take a look at farmers versus city dwellers, and then what was similar to both. You've got, I think the farmers actually had a step up because they were able to make their own food. And that, you know, not everybody can do that. You know what I mean? If you're living in an apartment in New York City, what are you going to do? Put a plant out on the terrace if you have one? So anyway, so the farmers were able to at least grow their own food. You know, if you look in the middle here, also women work to keep their families together by canning and sewing. So a lot of farmers could can their food as well. Does anybody can? Anyone ever can? Yeah. Okay. It's a good way to save food, right? It's like, you know, doomsday preppers. You guys should probably start prepping since that whole Ukrainian thing we were just talking about. Start prepping. No. Okay. But farmers also were losing their land because of the falling prices. That led to foreclosures. Tenant farming. What's another name for tenant farming? Sharecropping. We talked about this when we were talking about African Americans after the Civil War. So a lot of people are tenant or sharecropping, not just African Americans. Also, overproduction of the land. How many people have plants at home? How many people have family members that do not have green thumbs? Do you know what a green thumb is? It means the plants do well. Okay? So, here's what I want you to picture. This is what happened in the 1930s, which we'll talk a little bit about later as well. The ground was, they were putting too many plants in the ground, and it was sucking the ground dry of nutrients. So when you transplant a plant, what do you put into it?
Soil.
Topsoil. What color is it? It's black. It's really dark. Has a lot of nutrients. Really wet. It's very good. It's gonna help those plants, like, you know, survive the initial like beginning of their life. Okay. Now, if you take that plant and you put 5 more plants in the same pot, okay, what will happen to the soil? It's going to dry up really quick. So imagine a dirt and soil. So if you do that, what's going to happen? It's going to become dirt instead of soil. And dirt blows away, doesn't it? Okay, and so that's exactly what happened. Overproduction led to these huge dust storms in the middle of the United States called the Dust Bowl. Okay, and that's going to affect people specifically in that area as well. City dwellers, they lost their jobs, they're evicted, sleeping in parks, sewer pipes, shanty towns. I didn't get a chance to talk about this. Maybe I'll talk about it next class, which for you guys might be Thursday, I think. Shanty towns were called Hoovervilles because Hoover was blamed for a lot of, because he didn't do a lot of things for the Great Depression. There were breadlines, soup kitchens. I mean, we still have these, but I mean, a lot of people were taking advantage of that because they had to eat.
It's like a field trip.
Many people would sleep in rusted out cars, etc., okay? Suicide rates went up. You know, men abandoned their families and became hobos. I mean, yeah. I mean, that sounds weird, right? But they couldn't take it, that they could not provide for their families, and so they abandoned them. I know it sounds like the opposite, but they couldn't take it. And so a lot of them became, you know what hobo is? Go around